In the name of the one who loves the beloved and love itself, amen. Please be seated. Can I just check something before I start? How many of you were here at 8 o'clock last night? Okay, you're going to cope, right? You're going to cope. I was just calibrating about how much of last night's sermon I was going to preach again. We love storytelling at Christmas time. We love storytelling. The children were here yesterday, and they were telling the story that we've just heard read from the gospel with some flourishes. The star was played by two of the children, and they were dancing around because it was a restless star, and it was all over the place. In the early pageant, Rick Keneally played all three innkeepers, with a change of headdress in between each encounter so that it was obvious he was a different person. But the thing I loved the most was that as he walked across the stage and in front, a little child just behind me said, "That's Santa Claus." Thought it was very interesting, Santa Claus playing the innkeeper in the Nativity. You could write a story around that. We turn the cathedral at this time of year into a storybook. I've been talking about this for a couple of weeks. We turn it into a storybook. We want to tell you the story in all sorts of ways. We want to tell you the story with the candles, with the flowers. We want to tell you the story with the creche that's over here, with the nativity, the pageant that we do on Christmas Eve. We love to tell stories. Stories are really important. Stories sometimes sit on the page, and they can be a kind of little flat. Sometimes when we talk about the story, I wonder if we all think on Christmas morning that the story is just a nice story that we tell, just something entertaining, or if it has something deeper to it. You know, in the book of Titus, the letter to Titus that we just heard, we are told of the immense power of God's grace for salvation, which seems like this phenomenal concept that is beyond my ability to grasp. That's bigger than I can possibly put into words, that is huge. The idea of the immensity of divine resource existing somehow in the universe. And I can't cope with it. If I was to encounter that immense grace, the love of God, the greatness of God, if I was to encounter it, I'm sure it would decimate me. It's just too much. So we take that idea and we do put it into stories so we can comprehend it. But we are trying to grasp the immensity of God's grace as we listen to the story of a child being placed in a manger, as we contemplate people coming and looking in his face, seeing maybe something in his eyes that connects to eternity. I want you to hold on to that as I completely change direction and talk about Julia Child, which has been my Christmas obsession. I love Julia Child. I keep on wanting to call her Dame Julia Child because I believe that if she cooked in England, she would have received a damehood in England. She's a great American figure. I never watched her live because I was in England as she was on TV here in America, but I've discovered her. I love her coq au vin. I'm going to cook beef bourguignon on the weekend. I'm watching Julia on Max as my Christmas binge watching. I went through a couple of TV serials thinking that they would carry me through the Christmas holidays, but I watched them all too fast. So now I'm with Julia. And she is the story that I'm telling myself. And I was asking myself yesterday as I was enjoying watching her black and white YouTube on the making of French onion soup, I was thinking, why is this compelling? Why is this interesting? And I had to sit back and reflect, and for a moment it kind of dawned on me. She was there at the dawn of television. She was the first TV cook. But when the producers looked at her, they thought, what is this 51-year-old 6'2" awkward woman wanting to do on television? This shouldn't work. This isn't any of the normal values of our soon-to-be-birthed TV culture. Should be somebody young, attractive, and also somebody that doesn't drop things in the kitchen. But there was something about her that appealed to the people watching. At first, perhaps housewives, but also many other people, like me, men as well, who like to cook. All of us. There was something about her fiddling and futzing in the kitchen and making mistakes and just kind of waffling sometimes and getting lost in her script and then finding her way again and dropping the chicken on the floor and then saying, "Don't worry, the guests will never know." There was something about that humanized her and made people feel welcome to invite them into their living room and teach them how to cook. But what was she giving them access to? She was giving them access to the great wealth of French cuisine, a huge resource that she'd learned in the Cordon Bleu cooking school in Paris. She had an awful lot to offer, but it was only because she could connect as a human being, and even the mistakes that she made, that made it accessible and made us able to love what she was offering. I was watching the French onion recipe yesterday. There's this great moment where she couldn't open the bottle of vinegar because she was going to poach an egg. She just smashes it on the table to loosen the top and then says, "Look, sometimes it doesn't work. I'm just going to do this." And then pours it in. I felt seen. I felt like my cooking could work because hers doesn't. In a way, the story that she tells in her personhood gives access to some resource that's bigger, larger, more remarkable than the woman on the screen, perhaps deceptively is revealing. Julia Child led me to think about Johnny Cash. That's just how my brain works, okay? I don't know if you've ever listened to or watched Johnny Cash live at San Quentin. Do you know what I'm talking about? Anybody? It's the live show that he did, produced by the BBC in England, which is kind of strange. American country star producing for England, but he was really popular in England. I grew up listening to Johnny Cash because my dad loved Johnny Cash. He was always on the tape in the car back when there were tapes. We would listen to Johnny Cash a lot, and I got to love Johnny Cash. But I've listened to this live album over and over again. And you have to listen to the live album because you hear the inmates in the background. You hear their noise and their response to Johnny Cash. And Johnny Cash is playing with them, is making them laugh, is also going deep with them. There are the inmates, there's Johnny Cash, there are the guards. And I think this album is a beautiful example of the nature of incarnation. The idea of God coming near and becoming one of us so that we could be redeemed. There are these moments where it sounds like the thing could almost break down into a prison riot. But Johnny Cash manages to hold the inmates, hold their attention. He references his own scrapes with the law in order to help them realize that he has an affinity for them. And then in the middle of the show, he says, "I've written a song for you." I wrote it yesterday. It's really hard to figure out how to write a song that has any kind of meaning. So I sat back and I thought, I wonder how they feel. And I tried to put that into words. And I think I know some of the things that you might feel. I think I have no idea about some of the things that you might feel. And I don't give a damn about some of the other things that you might feel. But after thinking about that, I decided that I'd put into words what I might feel about being here. So he starts by singing, "San Quentin, I hate every inch of you." And there's a nervous laugh until the people who are there begin to realize that he is speaking to them about their day-to-day experience. Halfway through the song, he says, "San Quentin, I wish that you would rot and burn in hell." And they cheer. At the end, he starts to reflect on the American prison system and whether it's really doing any good. He said, "The congressman just doesn't understand. When you leave this place, you will be reduced somewhat as a person, not necessarily fixed or improved." At the end of the song, the inmates ask him to sing it again. He pauses and says, all right, I'll do that, but just for a moment, if one of the guards is still speaking to me, would they bring me a glass of water? I need a drink. The guard brings up some water, and you just hear kind of a gentle boo going on in the crowd. Still, there's a little sense of menace in the space. But he sings the song again, and somehow he is entering into the experience of the people who are there. Some of them who might have claimed to be there unjustly, some of them who were there because they had committed heinous crimes, some of whom had been stuck in poverty and therefore had become criminals because they had no other way out. His singing helped him to enter into their experience. And rather than it turn into a prison riot, it was an entertaining space. And at the end of the show, he started saying thank you to people. And at one point he said, thank you to the governor who allowed me to come into the prison. And the prisoners started booing. And Johnny Cash says, oh, you don't mean that. And then they all started laughing. There's something in that performance that speaks to me about the nature of incarnation. Johnny Cash was prepared to become one of the prisoners in order to turn this potentially violent or worrisome environment into a community, if even just for a moment. And I wonder if it was partly possible because he had riches of faith in his background and he'd made many mistakes and he knew how to access prayer in order to work through it. Let me go back to the beginning. I don't know how to encounter the immense grace of God that comes to me in the person of Jesus. It's too big. I do know how to encounter a baby. I know how to look into their eyes. I understand that Joseph didn't manage to book a hotel. My life is full of mistakes like that. I understand that the frailty of this story opens up for me access, not into just a nice story, but into the immense riches of grace, forgiveness, love. And I dare say that you have experienced frailty and moments of difficulty in your relationships, probably even this morning, probably even as you were getting ready to come to church. Probably last night when you were trying to get the food ready for the meal. You will later on today when people are treading on each other's toes and cooking meals. Remember that Julia Child was a human being who made mistakes, and that's what allowed other people in. The moment of grace can occur in the moment of greatest humanity. And our moment of greatest humanity takes place when we accept that we're a mess. When we accept that we're flawed. That's when we can open ourselves up to God's love and grace. Your flaws and faults are the things that open windows into the divine. You have to let God into those moments and realize that it's in those moments that you can figure out how to forgive yourself and forgive the people around you. And then you found God. Johnny Cash did it in a prison with criminals. I wonder who else does it. I am really touched when friends of mine who are alcoholic have discovered a higher power that helps them to heal. And then sometimes they're able to talk to me in a way that gives me access to immense grace that I didn't know was possible. Their words of comfort and guidance can be transformative to me. And it is the instance of their frailty that has allowed that to happen. The stories I hear from friends like that are like this story that we hear on Christmas morning. They are about human frailty, access to grace, and recognition that there is something in the universe that is so immense, so full of love, that it can transform all of us. Tell your stories today. Accept them for all their faults and flaws, and recognize when the brokenness in the middle of your story is the very thing that allows God into the moment. Thank you for listening. Merry Christmas. Amen.